What if I told you that what you love in a woman isn't always her? That maybe you fell in love with a mirror, not a soul? Yeah, that hurts to hear, doesn't it? But what if it's true? Have you ever stopped to consider that maybe the enchantment you felt, that feeling of being complete next to a woman, had nothing to do with who she truly was, but everything to do with what you projected onto her? No, this isn't self-help talk. This is deep psychology, existential philosophy, raw reality, and what you're about to hear today will shake everything you thought you knew about love, desire, the feminine, and most of all, about yourself. This video won't comfort you. It's not here to please. It's here to wake you up, because there's a pattern as old as civilization itself. One that's been tattooed onto the psyche of nearly every man since birth. The idea that woman is the answer, that she is the light, that she will save you from the void, that if you win her over, then everything will make sense. But that's a trap. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, called this an archetype. Archetypes are primal images that live in our unconscious minds, and the feminine archetype is one of the most seductive and dangerous of them all. Not because women are dangerous, but because what you believe about them is. And here's a truth no one had the courage to tell you. Most men don't love real women. They love the idea they've created of them. You call it love. But deep down, it's projection. You don't love who she is. You love what she represents in your mind. And that's where many relationships start to fall apart. Because one day, the magic wears off. The mirror cracks. The projection collapses. And what's left is a chasm between expectation and reality. Why? Because while you were falling in love with your inner muse, she was right there, being human, flawed, afraid, with desires that don't fit the fantasy you built. But you didn't see it. You didn't want to see it, because it was more comfortable to fall in love with a reflection of yourself, shaped by desire, ego, and emotional hunger, than to face the feminine in her raw, mysterious, and often disconcerting truth. And that's where most men break. Not because she changed, but because she was never who he dreamed she was. Are you starting to see the problem? This video is about that, about the feminine archetype, about what it represents within you, about how it drives your desires, your relationships, and often, your very identity. We're going to talk about childhood, about mothers, about emptiness. We'll mention Jung, Nietzsche, Kierkegaard, but we'll also talk about you, your fears, your choices, your soul. This is not an attack on women, it's an invitation to men, a call to wake up. And let me warn you, after hearing this, you won't see love, or yourself, the same way again. If you want comfort, click away now. But if you want freedom, take a deep breath and come with me. Before anything else, we need to understand what we're talking about. The word archetype might sound complicated, but the concept is much simpler and deeper than it seems. Carl Gustav Jung, Swiss psychiatrist and rebellious disciple of Freud, was the one who dove deep into this invisible territory of the human soul. He believed we are all born with an inner symbolic map, a collective unconscious, that guides us even when we're unaware. Within this map live universal forms, images, and ideas, the archetypes. They are like psychic blueprints that shape everything: our emotions, our choices, our behavior, and of course our relationships. And when it comes to men and women, the feminine archetype holds an almost hypnotic power. Jung named this feminine archetype within the male psyche the anima. She is the internal image of the feminine that every man carries since birth. She has no face, no name, but she has power. The anima can show up as inspiration, beauty, sensuality, affection, magic, chaos, salvation. And the most dangerous part, when a man meets a woman who seems to match that inner image, he doesn't see her. He sees the projection of his own anima onto her. And at that point, he's no longer in a relationship. He's dreaming with his eyes open. You've seen this movie before, the man who falls head over heels, who idealizes, who puts the woman on a pedestal, who believes she's the key to all his emotional fulfillment. But the real woman, with flaws, complexities, her own desires, can never live up to the fantasy he created. And that's when the tragedy begins. The woman starts feeling like she can't just be. She's expected to be the cure, the muse, the fairy, the saint, the goddess, and when she shows her human side, her shadow, the man feels betrayed, confused, broken. But the truth is, he betrayed himself from the very beginning by refusing to see her with naked eyes. He didn't want a woman, he wanted a symbol of salvation. The anima, when not consciously integrated, becomes tyrannical. She takes control of the man's psyche and turns him into an emotional addict, constantly seeking in women what he can only find within himself. And here's the most delicate point. When a man is unaware of his anima, he becomes easy prey for emotional manipulation. He thinks he's in love, but he's really enchanted by an inner reflection. And the woman, she feels it. She knows when she's being desired for something she's not. She senses when she's being used as a stage for the male ego to act out its search for wholeness. And many times, she plays along, not out of malice, but because she too was taught to act out this idealized archetype. She learns to be the muse, the sweet one, the perfect one, because society rewarded that for centuries. But deep down, she's still human. And when that humanity overflows, when the image crumbles, everything falls apart. Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." So stop and ask yourself, how? Many times have you fallen for a woman who, after a while, changed? But what if she never changed? What if it was you, blinded by your own projection? The archetype isn't the enemy. It's a portal to self-awareness. But only when you have the courage to look within and ask, do I love this woman? Or do I love what she represents inside me? Until that question is asked, you'll stay captive to your own inner images. You'll fall for illusions. You'll suffer from unrealistic expectations, and you'll keep calling it love. But true love begins when the projection ends. When a man looks at a woman and sees not an ideal, but a real human being. And to do that, he must first make peace with his own anima, because only a man who knows his inner world can walk through the real world without getting lost. Most men don't realize this, but the feminine archetype that controls their choices didn't appear in adulthood. It was planted much earlier, in childhood, in the lap, in the gaze, in the silence. The first woman a man ever meets is his mother, and it's through her that the unconscious begins building the image of the feminine. If she was affectionate, absent, demanding, fragile, too strong, unpredictable, all of it was recorded, not as conscious memory, but as emotional structure, as psychic blueprint. Here's the part no one talks about. A mother's love isn't just love, it's inner architecture. And if that love came mixed with rejection, confusion, emotional abandonment, or overwhelming need, the boy grows up associating the feminine with something that swings between heaven and hell, between warmth and emptiness. And the worst part, he doesn't even know it. He grows up, becomes a man, starts dating, and thinks he's choosing women, but he's actually recreating the emotional pattern of his childhood. Oh, she's complicated, but she has a soft side. She treats me badly, but then apologizes. I feel insecure, but I can't let go. Sound familiar? This isn't bad luck in love. It's the distorted anima repeating itself. It's your unconscious trying to fix what was never healed. You're not looking for a partner. You're looking for emotional redemption for the wounded child inside you. And until that wound is acknowledged, you'll keep calling love what is really just an attempt to fix the past. The feminine archetype isn't born ready. It's slowly sculpted from your earliest years, shaped by your mother, by female figures, by cartoons, by fairy tales, and later reinforced by every romantic frustration you swallowed without understanding. How many men today still live in fear of disappointing the feminine figure? How many still feel the need to be good boys in order to be loved? How many still shrink themselves in front of women just to avoid reliving the abandonment they once felt? The boy inside the man never left. He just changed clothes, but he still feels. And as long as he's in charge, you'll keep falling in love with ghosts. Jung used to say, the unconscious is timeless. In other words, it doesn't know you've grown up. If you don't look within and rewrite your emotional history, you'll keep acting like a boy, in a man's body. And the woman who shows up in your life, she's not to blame for this, but your unconscious will use her as a stage for your wound, a stage for your hope, a stage for your repetition. Want to break the cycle? Then stop chasing the ideal woman and start looking at the boy who's still waiting to be loved. You think you're loving a woman, But what's actually happening is that you're watching a movie inside your own head. And she, poor thing, has no idea she's been cast as the lead role. This is what Jung called projection, an unconscious mechanism where you cast parts of yourself onto another person. And when that projection is romantic, it's even more seductive. Because it's not just an image, it's an emotional theater. You look at her and say, she's special. But the real question should be, what part of me needs to believe that? Right now, you're not seeing the real woman. You're seeing your own hope, dressed in a feminine body. You're seeing the image you created based on your hunger, your emptiness, your unconscious desire to be saved, understood, embraced. She becomes all of that, without even knowing it. And when she acts differently from the script you mentally wrote, the magic breaks. She changed. She's not the same anymore. She finally showed her true colors. Really? Or did you finally stop projecting and start actually seeing? Most men don't love. They crave to be loved. They want the woman to see them, validate them, recognize them. And when that happens, it doesn't matter who she is. What matters is what she triggers. You say, she makes me feel alive. But what if that feeling is just the echo of your animus screaming inside you? What if you're not falling in love with her, but with the way you feel around her? That's not love. That's narcissism, disguised as romance. You love the reflection of yourself she gives you, not her. And that's where the danger is. Because when the mirror cracks, when she doesn't match your idealized projection, you feel betrayed. But how can there be betrayal if she never promised to be what you wanted her to be? Real love only begins when projection ends. But very few men reach that point. Because facing the real woman requires something most men aren't ready for. Facing themselves. Because the real woman, with her light and shadows, won't fill your existential void. She won't heal the absence of your father. She won't replace the approval you never received. She won't protect you from the pain of existing. But projection. Oh, projection promises all of that. And that's why it's addictive. That's why you cling. That's why even when everything screams leave, you still think she's the love of your life. It's not love. It's misplaced hope. You're trapped in a play. And the worst part, you're the writer, the lead actor, and you don't even realize it. Until one day, something happens. Reality hits. The veil falls, and you realize you spent years loving a role, not a woman. The good news? That moment hurts. But it also frees you. Because from there, you have a choice. Either go back to sleep, casting new actresses in your emotional scripts, or wake up and start loving with your eyes wide open. No illusions, no projections, no theater. The woman is not your mirror. She is an entire universe. But you'll only get to know her when you're willing to stop seeing yourself in her. The feminine archetype has always been powerful. In ancient mythology, woman was mother, healer, sorceress, spiritual guide. She was nature. She was mystery. She was womb and death, fertility and destruction. She was power, not fragility. But in modern society, that changed, or better said, it was tamed. Today, the feminine is no longer a symbol. It's a product. It's aesthetics. It's algorithm. It's an Instagram performance. It's the plasticized body, the soft voice, the self-help caption disguised as empowerment. Woman stopped being a sacred archetype and became a marketable character. She must be strong, but not too strong. Beautiful, but still accessible. Independent, but romantic. Free, but emotionally moldable. A modern plastic goddess who shapeshifts to meet cultural demand. And men, they're lost, completely lost, because the feminine archetype living in their unconscious doesn't match the real woman they encounter. They expect magic and get sarcasm. They expect nurturing and get competition. They expect depth and get strategy. But where is the sweet, sensitive, intuitive, inspiring woman? She still exists, but she's buried under layers and layers of social roles, digital neuroses, and self-marketing. And before you think this is a critique of women, it's not. It's a critique of the culture that hijacked the feminine and turned it into something even women themselves can't sustain anymore. They're exhausted too, because they've been taught to perform the archetype without ever being allowed to fully embody it. Taught to seem wise, but never be heard. To appear free, but still measure their worth through male validation. To look autonomous, but remain emotionally addicted to likes and invisible approval. The result? Men frustrated with women who don't match the myth, and women exhausted from pretending to be the myth all the time. And in this masked dance, no one truly connects. Everyone's performing, and love becomes a rehearsed choreography, not a real connection. The modern woman has learned to use the archetype as a weapon, not because she's evil, but because she was trained that way, trained to attract, seduce, and emotionally manage others. She doesn't seduce with affection, she seduces as defense. She isn't mysterious, she's strategic. She doesn't love blindly, she loves with a mental spreadsheet. And the man, in turn, keeps believing in the archetype as if it were real. He keeps chasing the muse, the fairy, the healer. And when he meets a woman who is wounded, manipulative, or cold, he blames her, without realizing he was projecting an impossible ideal from the very beginning. This is the silent tragedy of modernity. Both sexes are acting out corrupted archetypes and feeling disappointed for not living the original truth. Carl Jung warned, "The archetype is a psychic truth, but when manipulated by the ego, it becomes a mask." And that's what we have today. Masks of femininity. Masks of masculinity. Relationships based on appearance, not essence. You want to know why so many men today feel emotionally lost? Because they were taught to desire a kind of woman that no longer exists, or maybe never did. And the ones who do exist, real, human, imperfect, intense, they scare them because they don't fit the mold, because they don't cure the neediness, because they don't hold up the fantasy. So the man goes back to the cycle, looks for another one, another who, for a few months, can wear the archetype costume, until she too fails. You want to break free? Then it's time to kill the corrupted archetype. Not to deny the feminine, but to rediscover it. A woman is not a role, she is not a symbol, she is a being. And only when you stop expecting her to behave like your projection, will you finally be able to know her for who she truly is. And even more than that, to finally know yourself. There's a phrase no one says out loud, but it secretly governs millions of relationships today. If I don't please, I'll lose. And behind that phrase is a man on his knees, emotionally, spiritually, and identity-wise. It's the man who, without realizing it, has become submissive to the feminine archetype he himself projected. And in his desperate attempt to hold on to that love, or what he thinks is love, he begins to negotiate his essence. He gives up his opinion, says yes when he wants to say no, tolerates humiliations disguised as jokes, accepts coldness dressed up as empowerment, smiles in silence to avoid conflict, and little by little, he disappears. But that's emotional maturity. It's knowing how to compromise. No. That's fear of being abandoned. It's panic over not being loved. It's the wounded boy inside the man whispering, "Do whatever it takes, just don't let her leave." So what does this have to do with archetypes? Everything. Because the man who hasn't integrated his own masculinity, who doesn't know his center, who hasn't faced his own shadow, becomes a hostage to the feminine. Not the real woman, but the idea of her. He believes he'll only be complete if he's loved, only respected if he's accepted, only valid if the woman next to him says he's worthy. And when she doesn't, he pleads. He bows. He tries to be more sensitive, more secure, more modern, but the more he tries, the less desirable he becomes. Because here's the brutal truth. A woman may admire the man who gives in, but she is attracted to the man who stands firm. And what does the modern man do? He abandons himself to fit into what he thinks she wants. He becomes the nice guy, the sweet one, the emotionally intelligent man. But deep down, he's just negotiating his presence to avoid rejection. Jung called this psychic self-abandonment. It's when you no longer live from inner drive, but from external expectation. You're no longer a being. You've become a reflection. An emotional avatar trained to please the dominant cultural archetype of the feminine. And the cost of this? Silence, anguish, hidden rage, loss of passion for life. That sinking feeling of not knowing who you are anymore. How many men today are married to their fear of being alone? How many are in relationships where they've completely lost touch with themselves? You think you're being understanding, but really, you're just avoiding the confrontation with your own truth. You think you're loving, but you're begging to be chosen. And all of this, because you believed the feminine was superior, that women feel more, know more, love better. That's a lie. She's human, so are you. But as long as you keep placing her on a pedestal and placing yourself at her feet, there will be no real connection, only theater, only submission, disguised as partnership. A relationship isn't about losing yourself in the other, it's about meeting yourself with the other. But to do that, you first have to meet yourself alone, to remember who you are without her gaze, without her approval, without the sex, without the good morning, my love. You need to remember who you were before you started molding yourself just to be loved. And from there, something shifts. You stop asking for permission to exist. You stop walking on eggshells. You rise. And when you rise, not to dominate, but to inhabit your authentic presence, the dynamic changes. Either she respects you or she loses you. And here's the irony. Very often, that's the moment she truly begins to love you. Because a woman doesn't want a mirror. She wants a man, and the world is full of reflections, but starving for presence. You decide what you'll be. There comes a point when a man looks in the mirror and doesn't recognize himself. Not because he aged, but because he got lost. He lost the steadiness in his eyes. He lost the clarity in his words. He lost the silence that once came from his soul and was left only with the noise that comes from neediness. It's at that point, and only then, that some men wake up, because awakening never comes in peace. It comes in collapse, in heartbreak, in that emotional rock bottom where the only question that remains is, who am I without her? And the answer doesn't come quickly, because most men never learned how to ask it. They never learned to build themselves from the inside out. They were always shaped from the outside in, to please, to impress, to be accepted, to not be left behind. But it's time. Time to stop begging for love. Time to stop editing yourself to fit in. Time to stop seeking in others what only lives within you. This is the moment of returning to center. The moment when a man stops living to be chosen and starts living to be whole. Carl Jung called this individuation, an inner process, slow, brutal, but liberating. It's when you begin to gather the lost pieces of yourself. The warrior, the sage, the fool, the lover, the wounded one, everything you tried to hide, starts to emerge, and along the way, a truth reveals itself. You never had to be perfect. You only had to stop lying to yourself. You've suffered enough trying to be the ideal man, trying to prove you're enough, sensitive, mature, irresistible, smart. But what if your freedom is exactly in no longer needing to prove anything? The awakened man isn't the one who conquered the world. It's the one who stopped being dominated by it. He doesn't live to please. He lives in alignment, aligned with his truth, with his values, with his shadow, with his light. And in that alignment, he begins to do what most never dare to do: choose himself. Nietzsche once said, "Become who you are." Simple, but nearly impossible for someone who spent their whole life trying to fit into someone else's expectations. But once you begin this return to yourself, everything changes. You start to see emotional games, and you don't react. You hear manipulations, and you smile in silence. You realize you no longer have to prove your masculinity with shouting or approval. You simply are. And in that grounded presence, something extraordinary happens. You become dangerous again, in the best sense of the word. Dangerous because you're not manipulable. Dangerous because you don't need. Dangerous because you can walk away at any moment and still be whole. This is the man who doesn't beg for love, who doesn't plead for attention, who doesn't chase validation, because he's finally understood that all of it comes from within. And yes, this path is lonely. The individuation process is a desert. You'll lose people, you'll upset others, you'll be judged, misunderstood, but in the end, you'll be at peace. Because peace isn't a place, it's a state of being, and only those who have the courage to sit in silence with themselves and not run find it. The masculine awakening isn't about becoming an alpha. It's about no longer being a slave. It's about remembering that you weren't born to bow, but to rise. And the man who rises doesn't need an audience. He doesn't need applause. He doesn't need female validation to feel like a man. He just is. And when the illusion falls, what's left? Truth. And in that truth, the real woman finally appears. Not the goddess, not the witch, not the savior muse, not the manipulative villain, but the human woman, full of contradictions, full of strength and fragility, full of stories you may never fully understand, and don't need to. You don't need to understand her to respect her. You don't need to dominate her to love her, and you definitely don't need to expect her to complete you. Because the real woman didn't come to save you, and she didn't come to destroy you either. She didn't come to be the mirror of your desires, or the stage for your frustrations. She came to be who she is, and you'll only meet her when you stop looking for a character. When your vision of the feminine is no longer a projection, you start to see the woman as a separate being, not an emotional extension of yourself. And do you know what happens at that point? Love changes. It's no longer demand, no longer expectation, no longer an emotional transaction disguised as affection. It becomes a meeting between two people who don't need each other, but choose each other, between two whole beings, not two halves trying to patch existential wounds. But that's only possible after you've walked through the fire, after you've killed the corrupted archetype, after you've chosen to be a man, not a boy begging for comfort. The real woman isn't easy, but she's not unreachable either. She only asks one thing, that you be real too. And this meeting between the awakened man and the woman who no longer pretends isn't a fairy tale. It's an act of courage, because to love without illusions is something only those who've died inside and been reborn with their eyes open can do. In the end, this was never about her. It never was. It doesn't matter if she loved you or left you, if she admired you or ignored you, if she was your healing or your downfall. Because the real turning point is never about who stayed or who walked away. It's about who you chose to become after that. You spent your life trying to be loved, trying to be chosen, trying to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be, or your own illusion. But there comes a moment when the greatest choice a man can make is to choose himself, to choose truth, even if it costs him relationships, to choose strength, even if it disturbs others, to choose wholeness, even if it scares people. Carl Jung said, the individuation process is like dying before you die. And it's true. You die to illusion, you die to fantasy, you die to the childish archetype that made you depend on female approval to exist. But after that death, you are reborn. Not as a character, not as a seducer, not as the ideal man, but as someone who inhabits his presence, with dignity. And when that happens, something shifts at the core. You no longer seek love to feel alive. You live, and if love comes, it's welcome. If not, that's okay too. You stop being an emotional beggar and become the author of your own story. Because in the end, it's not about what the other person does to you. It's about what you do to yourself in the presence of the other. You weren't born to be accepted. You were born to become someone who can hold himself, in silence, in solitude, in misunderstanding. That is the true power of an awakened man. He doesn't bow to be loved. He rises to be real. And if you've made it this far, it means something inside you has already begun to awaken. And maybe you won't be able to go back to who you were before, because some things, once seen, can't be unseen. Some truths, once felt, burn, but they also liberate. Maybe now you understand that to love is not to erase yourself, that to desire is not to lose yourself, and that being a man is not about being accepted. It's about being authentic. The real woman exists, but she can't find you while you're still being a reflection. Only when you become a presence. Only when you stop asking for permission to exist. So I ask you, are you ready to choose yourself? If this message touched you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, because here we don't offer easy advice, but hard truths, and share this with a brother who needs to hear it. He might be trapped in a theater and not even know it. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, remember, a man who finds himself never kneels again.